How to use the Mesh Warp tool in Affinity Photo, PC or Mac. Where's the Mesh Warp tool in Affinity Photo? Go to the Tools panel and select the Mesh Warp tool. There it is. You've also got Perspective tool. If you can't find the Mesh Warp tool, go to View and then go down to Customize Tools. Select that and there you will find it in here. You can see it here. Here it is, and you simply drag it over into the Tools panel and there you have your Mesh Warp tool. The Mesh Warp tool is slightly different from most tools. It's also got a command and you can find it via the Filters menu. Go to Distort and Mesh Warp. Like the Mesh Warp tool, it's a destructive effect. So simply go over here and you can then modify the image and distort it and then click Apply. You can also go to Layer and New Live Filter Layer and down to Distort and Mesh Warp. In this case, it's a live filter layer and it is non-destructive. So you can apply all kinds of warps and distortions. Click Done and then go back to it later. And you'll notice in the Layers panel, you've got this. Now I'm going to go through this later as well. So Mesh Warp tool, lots of great features with that. To use the Mesh Warp, just go over here, click the Mesh Warp, and I've got a gradient. That could be anything. It could be images, patterns, designs. And you can see what you get. You get this bounding box. There's a lot of functionality here. Possibly many of the features I will not cover, but I'm going to try. So let's just go over here. The bounding box all the way around. You've got these points and you can click on any of them. You can click on two of them if you want. But I'm just going to click on one now. Just click there and I can drag and I can distort that gradient. Now I've gone for a nice colourful gradient so you can see the curvature there as it distorts. If you just go for a very flat design, you just probably won't be able to see anything. So you can drag this around. You also notice you've got these control points. These control points can also be used nicely fine-tuned things. You can drag it that way, you can drag it any direction, all the way, and you can stretch it all out there or this way. And you've got options here to convert, all those sorts of things. That will be covered later. And you can drag that around. You can also drag this one around, do the same. So you just drag it around, manipulate that. Now, if you can't see this, and sometimes it's quite possible it's not there. At any point, say you're using this one and you've lost that one, all you need to do is go back to this one, click it and select it, and the control points will reappear. Both will appear. So then you can manipulate that. And you can do exactly the same down here, the bottom one. You can drag this around. Now, at any point you can always undo, so you can see what happens. It just puts it back. Just go Control Z or Command Z and put it back to what it was. Now you can control it that way. You can also go on the line. Just click on the line and just drag it down. Now you're not adding any points at this point. You're just distorting the design and you click on here and you can see what happens. These control points are changing, not the line. You haven't added any points. So as you move that, you can see what happens. Both those are moving at the same time. And you can push it out or in, go this way, and you can really distort the gradient in literally thousands of ways just by manipulating just that single line. And you can do the same with the other. So you can just drag this around, drag it out again, drag it this way, overlap it is another option as well. So lots of different options there. Now what you can also do is you can add additional points. Now you can click on it, a single click, and you'll notice what happens. It just adds this little pin. That's useful later, but let's just go to the next thing. What you need to do is double click and you can go on this line. If I double click this line, what happens, you can see I've just added a point here, right along this line. I've clicked on this line, added a point there, and it puts also one over this side. And you can see it follows the curve. Now, sometimes it does get slightly confused, and when you've got a really complex design and you've got lots of different lines going everywhere, it tries and it puts it in a sort of curve. Doesn't always sort of match what you think it might put it to, but it's certainly useful to have it. Because if you just did it a straight line, you would have it cross that way. Sometimes it probably wouldn't be so effective. I guess it would be nice if there was an option to control that. But what you can now do is exactly the same as before. You can manipulate this line. You can do exact, and you see as you do that, you can see distort it. You can drag it. You can drag this whole line, push it, pull it really over that way. And you can really see this crunch of the colours. Or you can drag it this way or drag it down. Again, you can go over the top, fold it over, all kinds of different options. You can just pull it and you can select anywhere. You don't have to select there. You can select here, say. And it's actually a lot more extreme when you go close to the point. So if you go to the point, if you go in the center, you can see you can make it a lovely smooth change. Go to the edge, if you go really close, it really goes quite rapidly. And it's a lot harder to control if you're manipulating it from this point. You can drag it like that just by dragging. You can see you can really create some weird distortions using that. Of course, depends what you want to achieve. You can also add points to this. You've added this one. You can double click this. You can also add a single point as well. But again, but double click. And now you can see what it's done. It's tried to interpret between that and that. And it's got a slight little wave. And you can drag. Now, if you go on this line, again, I'm not adding a point to this bit. So I'm working with this bit here. So I'm just dragging this. Again, you can go right close to the point and you can see it's a lot more sort of quick. If you go in the center, it's a bit more sort of slower to work with, but still I prefer that. And again, you can do exactly the same here. So you can drag it from center, or you can very close and you can create some very extreme distortions very quickly that way. But again, you've got this. Now you can go up here, double click, and you can see again, it follows that line. It makes that interpretation of where that should go. And you can do it, of course, just see. I don't know how many you can add. There might be a limit. I don't know. Maybe 100 lines, 50 lines. I have not found a limit yet. There possibly is one. But what you can do now, you can actually work with, say, this. So you can select these. You can just drag over these and you can select a number of points. Sometimes easier to select more points or not. But then if you want to manipulate just that area, don't click on the center there. Or don't click on certain part. What you need to do is click on a point. And then you can shift all the points. So just click on one point. As long as they're all been selected, you can then drag and you can see it will distort there. You get this sort of like square design using that approach. And you can position it there. But also what you can do is say you got here, you can click on this, just add this single point, which doesn't seem to do much. You think, oh, that's strange. What's that point? Because when you first start with this, it doesn't do anything. I know when I first got it, I was working with this tool and I was thinking, what does that do? It doesn't seem to make any sense. But now I've clicked in that center and now you can see what happens. It drags, it's automatically selected those, even though you can't see them selected. It's manipulating that whole block and dragging it over. So you can drag that whole block and you can repeat that. Just put that there and you can see then that's dragged. Or click here. Again, make sure you don't double click. If you double click, so if I go here and I double click, it will add, again, this interpretation. I say sometimes it starts to get a bit weird how it does it. But you can, of course, anytime, any of that central point, you can see what happens. It moves and manipulates these points and drags it up like that. And you can, of course, continue just to add multiple entries. And each and every time, you notice when you select it, you've got exactly the same as you had before. You've got these control points. So you can go to the control points and then you can just drag that and manipulate it. You can click on that one and drag and manipulate that. And as you do that, you can see what happens. This gradient distorts here. If I go down here, click on this one. Again, you can see the yellow and the green just getting dragged out there. So thousands of different designs can be created, manipulated. Now, one thing you can't do, and it's slightly frustrating that there's no feature, there is no way of storing the warp preset. There's no option here at this point to save this mesh. It would be nice if there was a preset so it could be applied, also reapplied. You can't do that either. Of course, you can always get work around that. You got live filter effects. You got macros, but it's not the same. I think it would be nice to have an option to be able to store the presets here. Once you're happy with it, of course, you can click apply and then you've got your end result there. And of course, you've got your distortion. Now, again, it could be anything. It could be images, it could be type, it could be pattern designs, could be it could be other gradients, combinations of gradients, brush strokes, and lots more. You can also use the mesh warp with layers. Just go to the layers panel and you can right click and you can duplicate. So I'm just going to duplicate this layer and then I'm going to resize it. Just going to make it slightly smaller than the original, perhaps even smaller. Once you've done that, what you can do, go over to the mesh warp. So mesh warp tool, select that. Straight away you get your bounding box and it's around the layer, not the entire image, just the layer. And as before, you can modify the mesh just by simply moving around the curve here or here. So you can distort the design in all kinds of ways. Again, it's a pity there's no presets. You can't save this. What you can do, you can also double click and add some more points. So you can distort it in other ways. So once you've done that, once you've done your distortion, click apply. And now you've got your distorted design on that layer. You've still got, of course, the original layer. But what you can also do is make certain you select it, and I'm just going to use the move tool. You can move it around, reposition it. You can also go to filters and you can repeat mesh warp. And you can see what happens. Just makes it slightly bigger now. Now I can also undo and I can also duplicate this layer. So I'm just going to right click and again duplicate this one which has been warped. And I can warp that. Repeat mesh warp. So now I've got slightly distorted design of the previously distorted design. And of course what you can do, you can use blend mode so you can combine them into multiple layers. So just go here. I'm just going to go with maybe lighten. And you can see the effect there. Maybe go with lighten for this one as well. Or difference or any of the others. And you can see the sort of effect you can create. All kinds of weird and wonderful distortions and layering. And of course, again, make sense just select that layer. Go to this and you can repeat that. Or right click and duplicate and then repeat it. So repeat mesh warp and you can see now you've got that image distorting off there. And of course you can always still resize the image. You can still change it, rotate it, apply effects to it. Also what you can do, and I'm just going to go back now to the original design, you can warp multiple layers. So let's just go right click again, duplicate. Now of course I could create other images, I could place other images. I'm just using this single image for example. And I'm going to create that. And I'm going to hold down the Alt Option key. That's another way of duplicating. So you can see you can duplicate that. You'd think it's going to be pretty easy to use the mesh warp on these three. Well, just quickly go and show you what happens. If you just go over here, mesh warp, it just uses that one. It doesn't use all three. Workaround, let's just come out of that now, is make sure you select them all. They're all selected. Right click and go to group. So they're all grouped into a single group. Then go to the mesh warp. And then you can see now you can distort all of them. So again, just go on there, double click, and you can distort that. Double click down there again, add some additional point. And you can see you can create all kinds of combinations of distortions. Obviously, if you apply it over this side, you're not going to modify this side as much. And again, just drag this out, stretch it this way or that way. And again, always remember to click apply. If you don't click apply, then obviously you won't actually warp it. And you can see now you've got this distorted design. Now you'll notice, and I'm just going to go back again. Let's just go get rid of this one. And again, layer and duplicate. There is also another great feature, which I haven't discussed yet. And that's mesh warp. And if you go in here, you see destination. By default, it's destination, and you can see what you're getting. So you distort it like that. You can distort it. The result is displayed. That's the destination. But you can also select source. And source is one of those weird ones because you apply and modify it in all kinds of different ways. You can move that around backwards, exactly the same as before. Exactly the same before. You can add all the points, you can distort it like this. And I think it's one of those things that really you can only use after a while of using it for a while. and you realise what's going to come out of it once you've applied it in this mode. And it's a very powerful feature. So I'm just going to now click apply. And now you can see what happens. It's distorted. You can see the distortions there. So it ripples that around. It's distorted there. So you generally know what you're going to get, even though you're not visually seeing it. But the reason I use the source is that you can actually create some very interesting distortions that will be very tricky to create using destination. And again, you can still do exactly the same. You can still repeat it. So make certain you select it, select the layer, and you can apply it again. Repeat mesh warp, and so on. So you can reapply it. And of course, you can always go mesh warp again. Unfortunately, it always defaults back to destination. But source is very, very useful and certainly should not be ignored because it is a powerful feature to create, let's say, just overlap as well. If you do a lot of overlaps like this, you can really create some very unusual distortions. And again, you don't see it until you've applied it. So click apply, and then you get that virtually disappears, which was, I think, was going to be the result. There it is. But it does create a very extreme distortion. And you think, what's the use for that? Well, you could say, why? Well, you can use it in a variety of different options. I personally, once I've done this, I often use it things like layer and new pattern layer from selection. This can be used for all kinds of designs. And you can, of course, hold down the Alt Option key and duplicate that design. And you can see you can create multiple copies of that. And this is obviously just with an image, but you can use it with text, with shapes, and much, much more. You can also use the mesh warp with gradients. So I've just created a gradient just using the gradient tool. Just create a quick gradient and then mesh warp tool. Now I'm using it on this layer. You can use it, of course, on any layer that you've got. And I'm just going to distort it by going to the top and dragging down. And I can squeeze that gradient to get that sort of effect. Now, of course, depends on the gradient you've got. It'd be different. Obviously, you could have a green or blue, etc. gradient, and you will achieve a different result. But now, make sure you click apply. It's a layer. You can just duplicate the layer. So just go over here to the move tool, select that, and hold down the Alt Option key and duplicate that design. And you can see, dragging it upwards like that, you can create all kinds of unique combinations like that. Also, what you can do, let's just go with this distorted design. You can always go to filters and you can repeat it. So you can apply it again. Now, of course, you could just go to the mesh warp tool and distort that. But you can also simply go for repeat mesh and it will squeeze it even more. Or just go to the mesh warp tool and distort that. And you can see that layer then can be squeezed and distorted in different ways. Click apply. But as a layer, you can also add layer effects. So just go over here, layer selected, go to effects, click there, and then go for 3D, change the radius, push it up that middle I would suggest, and also outer shadow. Make certain you click there and highlight, and then you can see all the settings. I would suggest like radius, about the middle, offset, intensity in the middle, and you've got that design, as well as the opacity. Click close. And again, you do exactly the same. You can distort this one, but also you go to the move tool and hold down and duplicate this design. And you can see you create multiple copies of that. You can also rotate it. You just rotate that, distort it like that. Once you've done that, again, go to filters and repeat mesh warp, and you can see then you get this distortion. Repeat mesh warp, and you can distort it all kinds of ways. Hold down the Alt Option key and duplicate that design. Create all kinds of unique layers using this approach. Now, if you want to modify all these layers, exactly the same as before, you need to group them. So got that, go all the way down there, select all of them, right click, and then go to group. Now they're all grouped. You can then go to the mesh warp tool. Of course, it goes around the entire image there. You can distort it. So you can drag that down, drag that up there. And then, of course, remember to click apply, and you've got that. Exactly the same as before. Move tool, hold down the Alt Option key, drag, and you can duplicate that design. You can create all kinds of unique combinations of shapes. And of course, you can always apply other filter effects as well. You don't have to continue just with that. So let's just go back here. I've got this gradient. Again, I'm just going to duplicate it so I don't end up losing it. When you're working with something, you end up doing all these effects. When you go back and undo, you have to go all the way back to get to that one layer. Again, mesh warp, distort it like that. And you can, of course, distort it other ways. I've just been always distorting it. Then I can double click again there and add a distortion there. So you can create some very weird and sort of unusual sort of distortions there where you can drag it over as well, which I think creates some very nice effects. So let's just go with that. Click apply. Once you've done that, you can still then go and distort it with other filters. So filters, distort and deform. So just use that and then add some pins there. And you can probably, with a bit of effort, probably distort it in very similar sort of ways as the mesh warp. It's a very similar thing, I suppose. But I think it'd be tricky to do this in mesh warp. But you can see you can distort the gradient even further by using this. Now it's still a layer. So you can distort that up there, and I'm going to click apply. So you've got a very unusual design. Now, again, you can go back to the mesh warp. So click there with the gradient and then distort that design. And you can see you can create some very extreme results just by, again, let's just add another distortion there. Click apply. You can also use the source one option. So let's just go back to that original image. Let's just select that. So I've got that, again, layer and duplicate. And I'm just going to make it as a layer so you can see it like that. It's a bit smaller than obviously this one. Again, mesh warp. Instead of destination, go for source. Select that. And this time, just drag down there. So drag up that way, drag in that way, and drag in that way. Again, it would be great if there was some presets, because quite often I use this sort of one. And click apply. And you can see the result of that. You can create some truly unique distortions of your gradient design. And of course, you've got this design here. You can resize it, whatever, obviously within limits. And filters and repeat mesh warp again. And you can see the result of that. You can really create some unique designs. And of course, this material, this design, can then be used source for other designs. So you've got this, turn around and say, let's make a gradient pattern. So layer, go to new pattern layer from selection, and then you can see the design there. Now, of course, because of that break, but with the move tool selected, you can go up here and you've got the option here for mirror. And you can see now, you can drag this around and rotate it, and you've got an absolutely stunning, wonderful pattern, which of course, once you're happy with it, you can always still go to effects, click there and go for outer shadow. Let's just change radius there. You can see now you get this lovely effect there, and maybe 3D as well. Highlight that and 3D effect and click close. And of course, you can duplicate pattern layers. So hold down the Alt Option key and duplicate that, resize it maybe to create all kinds of unique combinations very quickly using gradients along with the mesh warp. And of course, these pattern layers can also be used with a mesh warp as well, and that's for a little bit later. The mesh warp can also be used with text. Now I'm just going to use artistic text, but you can also use frame text. So just create something. I'm going to go with the word text. You could of course use anything, different colors, different fonts, and I'm just going to create it that size. So once you've done that, to actually use the mesh warp, again, you could use the live filter effect. That is useful because you can use it and keep the text alive. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to go with this one, and that the mesh warp tool. And you can see as soon as I select it, you get this bounding box around the text, and I can distort the text. But you'll notice that the design is turned into a pixel layer. It's no longer text. So make certain you've actually typed it correctly. Otherwise, you will end up suddenly, you'll have to delete and restart. And you can then distort it, of course, in all kinds of ways, using exactly the same features as described earlier. So you can distort it that way, distort it this direction, and so on. Once you're happy with it, click apply. Of course, again, you can use filter and repeat mesh warp. And you can distort it even further. Sometimes it's quite nice to reapply it to see what happens. I was fine. but you might want to use this text and individual characters. So how to do that? Again, you could use mesh warp and try and select them. You can't. You need to convert this into a curve. So just go here, and it's text now. So I've got text, that's the key thing. If it was a pixel layer, you wouldn't be able to do this. So right click, and you can go down, and there's an option here, convert to curves. Means you can modify the nodes, you can modify the individual characters. So convert to curves. And you'll notice now over in the layers, and that's in the window menu or in the view menu in Studio, if you've got version 1, you can expand this out, and you've got obviously TEX. You just simply select the T. So with that selected, you can see that's now selected there. Go to the mesh warp tool, and then you'll notice now you're not distorting the rest, you're just distorting that. So you can just drag that and create all kinds of distortions using just the letter T and not, of course, EXT. You could do those as well, of course. And then click apply. Now you can do exactly the same as with the destination and source as before. So again, mesh warp tool. So with that selected, then go here and select source instead of destination. Destination is always the default. So source, and then you can distort it. And you'll notice as you do that, nothing changes. Exactly the same as before. And you can warp this, warp that, and you can create all kinds of different distortions like that. But you can only see it once you click apply. So click apply, and then you'll notice it's completely gone off, probably gone off the screen. So sometimes destination is probably the easiest one, but source can be used for great effects. You can always bring it back, of course, just do a quick undo. But of course, what you can also do is you can use this design. I'm just going to get rid of the word text now, delete the whole lot. I can use it with frame text as well. So frame text, let's just create some frame text. And also with that, now I'm just going to fill it. Short of typing everything in, I can always go down here and add some text. Insert filler text. Always useful. I should, of course, not be lazy and type it out. But that take half an hour. So once you've done that, exactly the same as before, frame text selected here. As soon as you use the mesh warp tool, click there, and you see you get this frame around this bounding box around it. And you can distort the text. Again, it's a pixel layer. So it's now, you can't change it. Not that you could change it because it was insert filler text. But you can see you can really distort this stuff. And of course you can drag it over this way or drag it over that way. And I'm just going to distort it like that. Creates a weird sort of cut off there. And then click apply. And you can see the text there. Now it's of course slightly blurry. It's very small text. You've distorted it in quite extreme way. So the result is not brilliant. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to create some artistic text. But what you can do, you can create an image with text. So I'm just going to create, again, just the word text. I know it's very, just the same text. You could, of course, use a lot more text than that. And you can say text, text, and you can create multiple entries. And of course you could, if you want, just group them and warp all the text all in one go. Again, just drag that down. You can rotate it. Maybe go and change a colour. Let's just change a colour. I'm going to not go with black. I'm going to go with, say, red. And with that, again, hold down the Alt Option key. And of course, you can also duplicate using the layer menu and duplicate. Always a great option as well. And you can, of course, then add some effects. So filters, go to blur, Gaussian blur, and just distort that there, change that. And right, I'm just going to go with that. Once you've done all that, go to layer, and you can merge it, merge visible. So it all becomes one solid layer. You can see that there. Now I can delete all these. I don't want them anymore, so I'm just going to delete them, but I've left this top text. I can do exactly the same as before. Go to there and mesh warp tool, select that, and you can see you've got this bounding box. Now weirdly, it just does it around the layer, and you can see it's not for the entire image. Anyway, but you can still warp it and distort it, drag that over there, and drag it this way as well. And of course you can combine the text as well. So click apply, then again select that, maybe hold down the Alt Option key, duplicate this design, maybe rotate the design. So rotate that around. Once you've done that, again, if you want, you can always go to layer and merge visible. So that all merged into one layer. Now I'm not going to delete them now, but I'm just going to leave them. But again, I can go over here and select this, and you can see now that layer there, and you can just drag that around. So you can create all kinds of weird and wonderful combinations of text very quickly by using this approach, using the mesh warp along with just basic word of text. And of course, it's a layer. So click there and you can go for effects, add 3D, add drop shadows, glows, etc. And of course, combine it with other effects as well. The mesh warp can be used with pattern layers. Now, sometimes the result is not always the same as the pattern layer you're expecting. So this is real trial and error sometimes. But I've got this layer here, and I can fill it with something more colourful than this. Let's just go for a slightly better. So gradient tool, and I'm just going to go with a rainbow. It's a much nicer design, I think. Once you've done that, go to the move tool, then go to layer and new pattern layer from selection. That turns that design, and this could be anything. It could be an image, it could be shapes, it could be all kinds of text designs, anything, as long as it's a pixel layer. So new pattern layer from selection. And now if I resize that, and you can see there's the pattern layer. That's going to be used as the bounding box for the mesh warp. And you can just resize that. I'm going to go for about there. With this selected, the move tool, you can go up here to mirror along the control bar, and you can click here, and then you get this lovely design. And you can resize this, move it around. But what you can also do is use this, the mesh warp tool. So select that, and you can see straight away what happens. The bounding box matches the pattern layer bounding box. Now, unfortunately, you can't modify the pattern at this point. You've got that actual warp there. You can't continue to modify the pattern. That would be nice if you could do that, but you can't. Don't think so anyway. So you can distort it. You can see as I drag that in, this is being dragged in on each and every one, all over the place. So you can create all. Now, of course, you'll notice the background's different because now you can see transparency. So the colourful. So this design here, the reason you're seeing it in purple is because that's purple with the underlying pattern. You can see that in the just layers there. You can see there purple. You can see over here, obviously, it's going to be red because that's what's underneath. That's the reason why it's different. And you can do this there. You can see that's got green. That's green there, so you can see that bit there. Once you're happy with the design, you can modify it, of course, in literally infinite ways. You can click apply. I have found that if you click make multiple additions and change it and tweak it, sometimes the result doesn't end up the same as you think. You get one very small element at the centre. So I'm just going to go with this. This should be quite happy. So click apply. There it is. But if you do try and distort it too far, do like say lots and lots of nodes to it, warp it and distort it, the result sometimes just doesn't match. Don't know why. I'm not saying there's any logic to it, but that's the way it works. And you can see now you've got your pattern design and you can move it. You can see the background layer there. You still got a pixel. I could delete it or remove it. You can see now, see the white there going through. So I can resize it, but also I can rotate it. And I can also apply effects. So just click here, effects, go for say 3D, make certain that's selected, checked, and set the radius. And you can see design there. And also outer shadow. So click there and put it back to the middle. I always go for that option. About the middle seems to be the best. And click close. And you can see you've got this lovely pattern design, which of course you can modify even more if you wish. You can always go to filter and repeat mesh warp. And it works there as well. Sometimes I think it works quite nicely. Let's say a very basic mesh warp. Too complex, does seem to get confused, doesn't seem to generate result in the way you expect. And of course, now you've got transparency. You can hold down the Alt Option key and create another pattern layer. And you can see then you get this sort of result by adding more. And you can of course resize it. You don't have to keep it the same size as the other pattern layer. They're independent. You can also rotate it, build up all kinds of complex designs using that pattern. And then of course, Once you're happy with it, just go to layer and you can merge visible. Always just quickly merge it into a single layer, which you can then, of course, modify. So let's just remove this one. So I've got this pattern layer here. Actually, I can just resize this. And again, go here, mesh warp again, or again, go down here and repeat this and distort it even more maybe. Now, obviously, every time you do it, it's going to slightly probably degrade it a bit. It's not going to be perfect, so you can stretch it and distort it. So let's just double click and you can see if I create this sort of design. Now you'd expect when you exit this design. Now, cross fingers, that's the design you'll get. But I have noticed that sometimes it doesn't like that. It does seem to be when you add extra nodes. So just pointing that out, that if you keep it nice and simple, nice sort of just the smooth curves, it seems to be, I mean, it still creates a very nice pattern design. It's still a pattern and you can resize it. You can duplicate it, hold down the Alt Option key and duplicate that design to create a very, but it isn't what you actually created in terms of the warp and the pattern. And of course you can use not just gradients, don't have to use gradients, you can use it with text. So again, artistic text tool, create text, word text. Let's just position it there. I can then go layer and new pattern layer from selection and it will not work. You need to rasterize it. So go to layer and down to here and rasterize. So it's rasterize, it's a pixel layer. You can now use it. So that's always the key thing to remember. Layer and new pattern layer from selection. And you can see the design. Now obviously you can see the other text as well. And let's just remove that previous text. And also I'm going to remove the grey there so you can see it a bit easier. Again, mesh warp. Again, it follows the bounding box. So you can just then drag there and of course you can see the text goes in. Now that's the one good thing. So let's just cancel that. Why? It's obviously nicer to use mirror. If you use mirror though, you'll notice what happens. You get this effect. But it does make it easier when you use mesh warp. So mesh warp and distort that. You can see the text obviously flows into each other. You can distort it in all kinds of ways to create all kinds of quite unique shapes and pattern designs just from text. Again, don't push it too much because if you go and add additional nodes, it does seem to go wrong. So click apply and it goes wrong even then. So it's not perfect. Now, probably 99% of the time, you will get the text and design you expect. And you can always undo and try it again. Maybe a slight modification sometimes seems to actually resolve it so it doesn't end up doing that, or maybe creating a slightly different warp. So something not so complex, you might go apply. No, doesn't like text as much as obviously the other designs. But it's nice, you've still got this text design, and again, still hold down the Alt Option key and you can duplicate the text and create all kinds of layouts like this very quickly. And of course you can combine these patterns, merge them all using the merge selected. You can use the mesh warp with the repeat feature. So filters and repeat. So if you've got there mesh warp, you can use that. So if I'm just going to go over here, select mesh warp tool, let's just distort it just slightly, just crunch it in a bit. Then click apply. Then I can go to filters and repeat mesh warp. And you can see what happens. It squeezes in again, filters, repeat again. You can obviously use the shortcut, Command or Control F, and you can squeeze it like that. But what you can also do is you can apply it again. Now let's just unlock this. It needs to be unlocked. It's just a background layer. It was locked. So now I can rotate it. So let's just resize it slightly and rotate it. So you can see it. Let's just show the entire layer. If I apply the repeat filter now, what do you think is going to happen? You think it would curve along the top and curve down the bottom. Let's just do it. Filters, repeat. It doesn't. It still remembers that transform as it just ignores. It knows that it's the same image, so it squeezes it exactly the same way as before. So you can undo. Well, if you want it to squeeze in using that repeat, the way around that, go to layer. There's probably other ways, I don't know, but layer and go to rasterize. So as soon as you've done that, it's been rasterized. Now, of course, the image is going to degrade. I'm quite certain every time you apply these things, you're really sort of stretching and distorting in lots of different ways. So go to filters and repeat mesh warp again. This time it squeezes in the same way as before. It's just using that curve at the bottom and curve at the top. So it's not actually just curving it, squeezing it that way, the horizontal way. And of course you can then rotate it. And if you do the rotation, say like that, again, if you want to apply the mesh warp so it actually distorts the shape like this, go to layer and again rasterize, and then you go to filter, repeat mesh warp, and you can see then it distorts it in the correct way where it gives that curve around there. So you can really distort designs in thousands of ways using this approach. So just undo that, and again, maybe you have two. So you've got, say, two images. Let's just quickly duplicate that one. Hold down the Alt or Option key and duplicate. And the key thing is always to remember is to use selection and group. So group them all. So right click and group. So they're all grouped into a single collection there. And then of course you can go filters and repeat mesh warp. It doesn't work. Now of course if you want to do it, you'd think it would, wouldn't you? But no, unfortunately it doesn't see that group as the same as a pixel layer. It's not a pixel layer. So if you want to, you need to go to layer and down to rasterize. As soon as you've done that, of course, you've now got pixel layer. Now you can go to filter and repeat mesh warp. And you can see it now applies exactly the same distortion as before. Slightly odd, that one, I must admit. I always think the group should actually work just the same as a pixel layer. It doesn't. You can also use exactly the same repeat with other things. So let's just remove that. Go there, text. Let's just create some text. Obviously very small text there. And of course you can create it in any size. So just drag that there and apply. It's not available. Exactly the same as group. Reason, it's not a pixel layer. See, pattern layers are slightly different. That is still available as a pixel layer just within the bounding box. But this isn't. What you need to do is go to layer and rasterize. So once you've rasterized it, pixel layer, filters, repeat mesh warp. So it will warp in the same way. So you can apply it again and again and distort it that way. Exactly the same with shapes. So if you go to a shape, select that, fill it with something so you can see it. Again, filters, repeat mesh warp, not available. Again, you need to go to layer and down to rasterize. Once you've done that, you can then see it's pixel layer, and you go to filters and repeat mesh warp, and you can distort the design using that. Repeat it over and over again. And of course, that's the same for any of the shapes. So any of the shapes you see over here can be used in that same way. So that repeat can be applied, as can the mesh warp. You can also use shapes with the mesh warp. If you go over here, and I'm just going to create a cog or any of these designs, loads and loads of different shapes, they're all vector designs. But as soon as you use the mesh warp, so make certain you've got the selection, and I'm just going to set the number of points. You've got to decide straight away how many points, how inner radius, all those settings. Because if you go to the mesh warp, as soon as you do that, it will be turned into a pixel layer. So click pixel layer, and then you of course can distort that design. So let's just drag that in and distort the star into that sort of shape and click apply. Once that's done, of course, you can go to filters and repeat mesh and so on to create even weirder and more wonderful shapes. But what if you want to keep it live? So let's just remove that. And again, just go create the star design. So you got this. Well, how to do it? Well, you go to the layer menu. So let's go to the layer menu, and you can go down here and new live filter layer, and down there distort and mesh warp. It's a live effect. Live effects are great because you can then just change the underlying design. So you've got this, you can distort it. So let's just distort it in, obviously stretch it down like that, any number of ways, and click done. But you'll notice that when you finish, it's still a star. So you expand that out, you can see mesh warp there. It's applied as a live filter layer, and you can tweak that as well. So if you decide, oh, you know what, I don't want that warp, it means that you can go back to the star. So if you go to the star, now you'll notice that none of the settings are available as that point. But if you go back to the star tool, you can see you got that 5 points. So let's just change that. I can go for, say, maybe 10 or 15. So you can see that distortion is still, or warp is still being applied. Now I've got 44 points. Also, if I want, I can go to the gradient. So I can think, oh, you know what, I don't want that gradient. So that gradient, I can change it. So I can just tweak it. So maybe put that there, maybe, or I'll have some blue or something. So I put some blue in there and you can see the change there. Also, you can go to the mesh warp. So you can select that, double click, and you can bring this up again. You've got the mesh warp there, and you can distort it a bit more. So let's just stretch that, distort it that way, maybe distort it that direction. And then once you've done that, done. Just make certain you always click the done. You come out of that. Now, unfortunately, this feature does not include any blend modes. It's a bit different from most of the live filter layers that have the option for blend modes. This one doesn't. So if you want to use with blend modes, the only way probably around that is to use duplication. Duplicate the design and then obviously combine that with the underlying shape. So click done. And you can see you've got your distorted design there. So if you don't want it, let's just quickly delete. Let's delete the whole thing. So delete that and delete that. Let's just quickly show you. Go there, select create a star and right click and duplicate. So you've got two. So two, you can now, exactly the same as before, go to layer, new live filter layer, go to distort and mesh warp. That's a live effect, so you can change it at any point. Anytime later, you just distort, and you can see now you've got the underlined star, and you've got this star. And you can distort that, and then click done. Well, at this point, what you can also do is you can always go back here, and you can go blend mode, and let's go for darken, or overlay, difference, say. You can go through those, I'm going to go with difference, so you can see it. You can also select there, and you can move it, reposition it. So it sort of combines the blend mode opacity features that you should have it within the actual tool, but unfortunately it's not available. Would be nice if it was, but it's not. So you can see again, you can still modify the star. You can turn around and say, oh, I don't want 5 points. I want 20 or 30 points, 44 say. You can always go to this star, select that and go to 44 so it matches exactly. Like that, and you can see the result of that effect. Again, select that star and you can reposition it, move it around to create all kinds of combinations of that star shape with this star. And it's all still live. It's still a star, still a design you can modify with all the settings. And it's the same with all these other shapes as well. And you can of course do the other things with text and much, much more as well. You can also use images with live filter layers as well. So if you don't want to distort it using the mesh warp tool, and that's a destructive effect. So once you've applied it, the only way is to undo and undo. But you can always, with that layer selected, go to layer and go down to new live filter layer, distort and mesh warp. So you can distort this design and you can see distorted there. And I'm just going to go for a basic distort, something like that. And as soon as it's done, you can see there, you've got this layer and you can see mesh warp. That's the live filter effect, and there's the background, still untouched. So you can go click done. You can always at any point double click again, just go here, the mesh warp, double click it, and you will see this comes up again. And you can warp it even more, continue to modify the design. You might think, oh, the design is not exactly right, I think I prefer it there, and click done. But you can also go back to this, the background layer, and you think, you know what, I would love, you could use any effect. You could use color effects, you could distort it in all kinds of ways, and that's what I'm going to do. I can go to filters, I could use blur, distort, so deform. So just go for deform, and you can add some pins. It's a great distortion feature itself, but I'm just going to add some deform, so I'm just going to randomly put them there. And as soon as I've done it, of course, realise the key thing is, with deform, always make certain you select the move tool. Move tool and deform go hand in hand. So filters, distort and deform. Now you can actually add the pins. You can add the pins, but you can't move them. Slightly odd. I think that's a slight feature. And you can see as you do that, now you've still got that live filter effect, but you can see what happens. You can move this around, and that really does distort the design in all kinds of weird ways. You can just select that pin, and you've got here linear constraints. So let's just go for similarity. And you can see the result of that. Ooh, you can see parts of the all going off in different directions, and you can really distort that layer. You can see you can twist it around, so you can see that effect bending all the way around, and click apply. That filter effect, the deform, has modified the image. It's a destructive effect, but the mesh warp is still valid. So you can click on the mesh warp, double click, and you can still say, oh, you know what, I made a mistake there, so I can still distort that. That is alive and remains as live. And you can see you can just distort it in all kinds of different ways. And again, just done. You've got the end result there of that distortion. Of course, you can use this with other filters. Let's just go back. This guy's just going to put it back to say there. So that background, I could use, say, filters and distort and mirror. Mirror is a great one. I love mirror. So mirror, and you can see what happens. It duplicates that, obviously, a reflection. That's with the basic setting of 1. But you can go for, say, 10. So 10, you can still modify the origin point, so you can still reposition it. And you can see then you get this lovely mirror effect, which is also being modified by the mesh warp, which is still live. So you can just leave it at that position. So you get a really weird sort of triangular design there. And also you can change the input, of course. So you can change that. You can see the distortion there. Change the output. Move it around to create all kinds of very unusual designs. And this is great with other things. So instead of just using that, maybe use a gradient. So let's just go here to the gradient. So go to the gradient tool. Now, if I apply a gradient, sometimes it's going to apply over the whole thing. In this case, it luckily applies it just to the layer, not all over the place, fills the whole design. But I'm just applying it there. But I'm going to go with a slightly more colourful one. There's a nice colourful gradient. And I can, of course, continue to move that around. But I can do exactly the same as before. Background layer, still selected. Mesh warp, still there, still live. I can go to filters, and I can go to distort, and this time mirror again. And you can see the result of that. And you can reposition it, the origin point, change the input, number of mirrors. I'm going to make it go for the extreme. And you can see you can create all kinds of really weird and wonderful colour effects. I'm just going to go with that. Input there, maybe there, something like that. Click apply. But this is still live. So go to the mesh warp, double click, and you've got the mesh warp, and you can still distort that. So you can see that sort of mirror effect can be then dragged around with all those colours from that gradient, moved around, repositioned. And you can always double click, of course, do the exact same as normal. You can then modify this design, drag it down like that, drag it up this way, and so on. Again, click done. Go back to the background, do exact same as before. So filters, go to distort, and maybe mirror or equations. Equations are a great one as well. Here's the panel, and then you can see that, changing that. And as you do that, you can change the origin point. So you can see now the mirror effect is applied all across this lovely distorted design. It's sort of folding in it on itself. Change the input, change that, so position it, say, like that. And you can see as you do that, you can get some really weird sort of black holes, sort of weird sort of spatial distortions very quickly, and click apply. And also you've got this background layer selected still. Filters, repeat mirror. You can repeat it. So just apply it again. And sometimes the effect can be truly weird. Sometimes you end up just getting darker and darker, or the colours end up, you just get more of a solid colour. Really just depends. But of course you can still combine it with other filter effects, twirls, and so on. So you can see then you've got the twirl effect added there, and you can see distortion there to create some really lovely contour effects. Maybe change origin point of that. And you can see as you do that, it all alters. The mesh warp is still live. Still change that if you wish as well. The undo brush can be used with mesh warp. How it works seems very odd. It does work most of the time. And I'm just going to show you one way that seems to work reasonably well. Just go over here, select the move tool, and I'm just going to duplicate this design. So I'm just going to go to layer and duplicate. So you can see you've got a duplicate there now. Now I'm going to warp using the mesh warp on the duplicate on that layer. Now this layer could of course be combination of effects, images, a whole load of different things. That's the current state of your image. So I'm going to apply now the undo. But to do that, I need to select point over here if I'm going to do it. But I'm going to do it after I do the mesh warp. So let's just go to the mesh warp. So mesh warp, and I'm going to distort this image. Now, of course, you can see the underlying image there. But I've distorted it, click apply, and you can see in the history panel, for some weird reason, it gets rid of the previous entry. And sometimes it just gets rid of lots of entries. And it doesn't restore them. Sometimes it does. Click apply. And it seems to restore it if you use the word, or sorry, the actual function duplicate. But other ones, if you apply various effects, blur effects, sometimes it just deletes them and you can't see them. Therefore, you can't do the undo. I'm not certain why. There's no logic to it as far as I can see. So I'll just go over here, again, select the move tool, because some weird reason the cursor seems to have an inability to select unless it's the move tool. Just go to the duplicate, select that, make certain that, and that is required for the undo brush. Please check out my video on how to use the undo brush. It is the most powerful tool, I think, in Affinity Photo. Go over here and select the undo brush. And now what you can do is you can apply your, what it is here, the duplicate. Now, of course, you've still got this other layer, but let's just apply it. Now, I'm using here blend mode of difference. You could, of course, use any of the others. And you've got opacity, 100%, 200. You can use any brush. Now, I just chose, obviously, the current brush. It's a spray and splatter brush, but you could use other brushes. Now, weirdly, on the second apply, it actually goes outside of the layer. You can see now it's allowing me to go further out. First apply, it just seems to confine itself to the layer, the warped layer. I think there's some logic there somewhere, but I'm not really certain. And you can see as you go down there, and it does still seem to follow it there, but you can see, weirdly, it has some outside of the layer. Very strange. And you can see as you do that, you can see the warp design. It concentrates in the layer, but it does allow for some weird, but it doesn't allow it there. I'm not really certain. Times I've used this, I keep looking and think, I don't know. Doesn't make sense because you've still got the image elsewhere. The duplicate, you would think it would be cover the whole thing, but it doesn't. So go back to normal and then you can apply it and you can see you've got your design and it's applied, of course, to this background. So if I click there and I can move it, so I can reposition it, you can still see the other layer. Now, of course, I don't want the other layer now, but I've just used it as a workaround to apply the undo brush. Shouldn't need to do that, but that's the way it seems to work. So there, I've just moved it and you can now see your design. Now at this point, if I go to the undo brush, it still works. So you can still apply and add back onto the image. You've still got the distortion, you're combining it, blending it. And also you can go to filter and blur and Gaussian blur, maybe apply some other effects. And again, continue to apply the image back over there on top of the mesh warp and also, of course, the Gaussian blur. But it does work in strange ways, and I would say duplicate seems to be the best way to get around the issue that where it seems to delete all of the history. One problem with the mesh warp is that you can't save a preset. I'm not certain why they haven't included presets for this, because it would be an obvious choice. But still, let's just go over here to the mesh warp tool, select it, and you can then apply it. But you can see along here, there's no presets. So how do you get around that? Well, macros is probably the only way I can think of. Please put in the comments below if you can think of another solution. But what you can do, you can record. So let's start recording. So I'm just going to go there, start recording in the macro. You can find that in the window menu or in the view menu, studio, and obviously macro. You also need library as well if you want to store it away for future use. So you got that, it's running, it's recording now. So now I can go to mesh warp or use the command, of course, that's another one in the filters. And mesh warp, distort it. So let's just apply distortion. And I'm going to create something more complex than that. So let's just create a few things there. So you can just distort it in all kinds of different ways. Double click and add some nodes. So you've got a fairly complex design which you've distorted. Like that maybe, put that there and that there. Okay, so you've got that design. Click apply. And you can see straight away in the macro, you've got mesh warp. Now I'm going to stop the recording. Again, one feature that's very odd, the cursor always goes, it's a very strange, the view tool. I want that, the hand tool. Then I can click here. Sometimes when it's the hand, it doesn't seem to want to click. I don't know why, but it does seem to have a problem with that. Or maybe it's just me and the cursor. Click there and it's stopped recording. But you've got the mesh warp there. Well, that's not the end of it. You can, obviously the macro is there, but that's only for this current work. So if you want to do some other macro and you record something, you've lost it. So you can save it and you can go here. Along this macro line, you've got here, this option. It's the second one there and it's got a little plus. It's not particularly obvious that it's add to library. And that's what this is over here. So add to library and it will ask, obviously it gives you a category. Unfortunately, you can't move it. It's stuck in that corner. Very strange. But you can give it a category. Obviously, you have to set the categories up. But I've got default. I'm going to go with that. And I'm just going to say, call it very memorably Warp 1. Click OK. So now, if I go to my library, you can see Warp 1 there. So I've got this design. And let's just delete that. And I'm just going to create another layer. Do some other design. Let's just create a gradient tool, layer, and new layer. Let's just create this, resize it, just to demonstrate that it works with different things. So I've got this design. This is later. You might do this a couple of weeks later. So you've created this design, and then you think, oh, you know what? I want to use Warp 1 because it was a great design. Simply click Warp 1, and then you've got it. There it is, lovingly distorted in the same way, obviously slightly smaller as before. Now you can, of course, again with it selected, again it goes back to the, I'm not certain if that's a feature that seems to be more and more, it's going back to the view tool. I always want the move tool. To me, default should always be move tool. Hand tool, I don't know why, but it does seem to be going back to that. Right, once you've done that, again, just click on Warp 1 and you can see you can warp it again. Click it again and you can warp it again. And you, of course, can repeat that and do that multiple times on different shapes. So let's just go for a star. Just create a star. Again, it's gone back to the hand. How weird. So you've got that design. Go to fill. And I'm just going to go for colour and blue. Change the number of points. And now what I can do, I need to rasterize it. Because if I go over here and just click on this, oh, strange enough, it does it for me. Okay, that's good. That's very handy. I mean, I could have rasterized it, but it does seem to do it. And again, it's still selected. You can warp it again, and you can just click. So this could be a couple of months later, but you've got a library of warps. You could, of course, create a category that's got all these warps. Again, not ideal. It'd be lovely if there was a preset, but this is a workaround for that. You can use the mesh warp with brushes. So I'm just going to apply a brush stroke. Now I can use any of the brushes. I've just used this one, apply it a couple of times. As soon as you've done that, if you go to the move tool, so select that, you can see it's just a layer. Exactly the same as anything else. So of course you could apply green, blue, red, all kinds of different brushes, ink ones, sprays, so on. But once you've got that as a layer, as a pixel layer, you can see pixel layer over here, you can go to the mesh warp. So go to the mesh warp tool, and select that, and you can of course use live. You can also use command as well. You can distort it, so you can really warp and distort your brush strokes, so you can create some really nice brush stroke odd. So whatever you create is not permanent, so you can actually just sort of crunch it up. That would be tricky to create by using the standard brush tool, just applying brushes going around, but now you can just go there, click apply, and there you have it, a lovely warp design. Again, select that, and you can see with the move tool you can reposition it, and you can create some duplicates. Hold down the Alt Option key to duplicate the design, the brush strokes, so you can fill the screen with this distorted design. And as before, with all the features, you can use filter and repeat mesh warp. As long as it's a pixel layer, repeat mesh, perfectly fine. And you can distort design again. Distort that one. As long as it's selected, you can distort it. Now the distortion will go too far. You can see it becomes a bit rough. You select another one, again, repeat mesh warp, and so on. But you can create some very abstract brushstroke designs using this approach with mesh warp and any brushstroke. Use selections with the mesh warp tool. Just go over here and you can select any of these. Rectangular marquee, just going to go with that one. But you can use, of course, select, and you've got a variety of different options. Selection from layer intensity, selection from layer. Just add a selection using that rectangular marquee tool. Now I can feather this as well, but I'm just going to keep it as is. Then go to the mesh warp tool and you can see what happens. It goes around the layer. It's not going around the selection. Doesn't do that. It'd be nice if it gave that option, but it doesn't. What you can do, just drag that down. And as you drag it down, you can see it respects the selection, so it doesn't go beyond, but you can distort the image within that selection. And you can see as you do that, if you drag that too far, you've got that transparency. So you can just distort it in all kinds of ways, click apply. Of course, you can create more complex selections than that. So I've got this selection now around this. Again, go to the rectangular marquee tool and you go for add. So you've got mode along the top. When you use these selection tools, you've got new, so it creates a new selection. Also you've got add, you've also got subtract, so you can subtract from it. You can see a little plus there. So you can create some interesting selections simply just by dragging there, and dragging there, create selections like that. Once you've done that, again, go to the mesh warp tool, select that, and still follows the whole entire image or the layer, and you can drag that down. You can see, again, it crosses over, respects the selection still, and then click apply. You can also use like type. You can also use layers. So let's just go for layers first. So select, deselect. So it's now back to as before. Go to the move tool and I'm just going to duplicate this. So layer and down there you can see duplicate. Right click, get a duplicate of it, and I'm going to resize that and put it there. Again, use selections. Now this time I'll use an elliptical marquee tool. So just create that. Now what I can do, mesh warp tool, exact same as before, select that. Again, you've got all the options along here. You can then drag this, not within the image, can't move, but just go here and drag down. Now, because of the underlying layer, you can actually see the image there. And you can distort that, drag that up. You can also go down to the bottom and you can drag that up, and again, you can see the obviously through there. And likewise, you can go that way or go that way. You can stretch it all kinds of different directions. Click apply. You also can always do repeat mesh as well, so you can distort it even more. So let's just undo. So that's layers, but you can also use other layers. Don't have to use just image layers like this. You can use type. And I'm just going to go for a very basic text. The word text. Text in white, you can make it obviously any color, any font can be used. You can also add effects, distort it. The key thing is, as soon as you apply your mesh warp, it does turn into a pixel layer. It's an automatic process. You might even like, before you do that, you might like to apply some effects. So filters, so the blur, Gaussian blur, and you can apply something like that. Maybe not so extreme, maybe 6 or 7. So you've got a nice blurry effect there. Once you've got that, you can now go to the mesh warp tool. Just go there, and you can see this time puts it around the edge there, and you can distort it. But what you can also do is you can use selections. So let's just go for selections and again select that. Go to select and selection from layer. Use that, or use exactly the same as you had before, these tools. Perfectly reasonable. And I'm going to go rectangular marquee tool. Just say select that area there. Then go to the mesh warp tool. And again, you can see the selections around the text, not the selection. And I can then just drag this. And in this case, you can see what's happening. The X is actually just coming in just slightly, even though it's just slightly off. See there, side, it's not anything there. And also you can double click again. You can distort it, drag it around. So you can get a real intense E there. And click apply. So undo that. Or maybe go for circular. So let's just go for circular or elliptical marquee tool. Maybe just concentrate on the X. So let's just create that. Also what you can do, go to select and go down here. You've got feather. So I'm just going to feather, maybe not set at 0. That's the default. Always find it unusual. Default is always set for feather. I'm just going to put it to say like 60 or something, 90, and then click apply. Again, go down there, mesh warp tool, still goes around the entire design. And then you can move that, drag that up. And again, now you can see a sort of a ghostly effect, sort of get a ghostly edge there. Drag that off and you can get a ghostly E instead, obviously, of the sharp E that you had before. And you can drag this one down as well and maybe just make it like that, just so the E is the big central part there. Obviously, you've got the word text there. And click apply. What you can also do, let's go select and deselect. Just going to move that text now. Because what you can do, you can also use that feather effect with this. But instead of using elliptical rectangular marquee tool, I'm actually going to go over here and go for select and down to selection from layer intensity. And you can see the effect there. Got a selection all the way across that. That's using this thing. But you can, of course, modify it. You've got various options here, select reds, all those sort of things. You've also got smooth, feather. You could use a lot more just to create even more unusual selections. Okay, go over here, select that, mesh warp tool, and drag down. And as you do that, you can see what happens. You've got the face just moving that way or that way. Now, it's fairly faint. It's not super, but it's, if you have a very dark image, and this image was very dark, I had to use levels just to brighten it up a bit so you can actually see it. But otherwise, it becomes a very faint design. Still pretty hard to see, to be honest. And click apply. Now, it's still got the selection. You can also go again, filters, repeat mesh warp, so you can distort it even further. And obviously, the further you distort it, it's just harder to see again. But just put that back there. Now, one thing you can do with selections is you can move it. So go to the elliptical marquee tool and you can drag. Now, you can hover over there. You can see that cursor change. So you can just move it. So you can see now you've got that the image, the face there, as well as all these other parts, obviously the trees, etc. The background there. Again, go to the mesh warp, select that, and again, you've still got around the edge, but this time the distortion is from a different part of the image. And you can still just drag this around, and that will just create a different effect. Some maybe slightly better or slightly worse, depending on what you want to achieve. And click apply. But you can also select and deselect, and then final one, just go, let's just undo that, don't want that. And create a selection like that. Again, go for feather, so select and feather. Always puts it back to default of 0. I wish it would actually remember what the last one I used was 105 or 90. And of course, then you can go mesh warp tool and you can distort that. And you can see again, it goes around the entire thing. But then you get this sort of ghostly effect of blurriness there. And you can drag, double click there and distort it even in more unusual ways. Like that. And you get this nice sort of blurriness around the edge there. Click apply. Select and deselect. The mesh tool has a few options. Just go over here, the mesh tool and mesh warp. Select that and you can see your bounding box. Now, unfortunately, there's not one that can reduce the size of the mesh warp. That would be nice. Or maybe rotate it or transform it. Lots of those tools would be nice. But what you've got is you've got this destination and source. Now, I've been going mainly with destination, but source is really effective. I've shown that already. But there's also an option here, synchronize. And that's an odd one because it doesn't look like it does much. But here it says destination mesh, match the source mesh. So let's do it. Let's go to the source. So select that and drag. And of course, you can see what happens. It doesn't do anything. Doesn't seem to do anything at all. Of course, it is. If once you click apply, it does something. But I'm just going to create that. But now, if I go and say here, click synchronize, you'd think, and hopefully it will be the case, that the destination ends up the same. So let's just click that. Synchronize. Now, if I go to the destination, it does. That's pretty good, isn't it? It does actually work. It does synchronize it. It's an odd feature that if you just click it, you think, what's it going to do? What's it going to do? But that's what it does. So it synchronizes it, puts it, which I think is quite useful in many ways because, of course, you might not create this normally. If you're just warping it, you might not, using the destination, you might not develop something like this. But the synchronize means that you can do it in the source and then you can just get this by just clicking synchronize. So there is a use for it. Unusual, but still very effective. Now also what you can do, you've got reset. Of course, that's very useful as well. Reset both meshes. So you can use, obviously, you've got source. Let's just go back to source there. You can still see it. Destination. So you can use both at the same time. Generally, I do not do that. Most of the time, I just work on either destination or I just work with the source. Very rarely do I work with both, but clearly you can. And also clearly you can reset them. So here it says reset both meshes. So reset, and it just puts it back. Basically, it's the equivalent of cancel. You can just go back into it, which is nice. Sometimes you don't want to cancel, but you just want to have this because you might still want to work with this, but you just made a mistake and you think, oh, let's just reset it because it's just got a mess. Too complicated. It might have created too many points, too many nodes. I always use points, but it's actually, I think in the help file, it says nodes. Obviously, that's been used in Illustrator for too many years for points. So now what you got hide mesh. Probably one of the least useful for me. I've never particularly used it, but there you've got, I'm not saying why you want to do that, because now you can't see it, which makes it slightly awkward to use. So why would you do it? I don't know. But again, you can still double click, I guess. Yes. And you can, but very hard to work with it when you can't see it. I'm not certain there is any real great use for that, but still, I guess if you want to just now that would be another great feature that I think would be nice. A randomized feature, maybe some, I say presets where it's got it like in a square grid or a rectangular grid of points, something like that, 4x3, 10x10, something again like that you would see in the gradient mesh in Illustrator. So let's show the mesh because I can't see any point whatsoever. Please put in the comments below if you can see any point why you want to hide it. So let's just drag that around and you can create some quite complex nodes. Again, nodes, not points. And you can drag, someone will probably correct me and say that it's actually points, but I think it's nodes. But you can see you can add this and you can click there. You can create a real tangle of design and you can distort it in millions of ways. But you've also got this option. And sometimes they seem to work, sometimes they don't. I have yet to be 100% certain what I'm doing when I click it. So I have to admit that. So there's this, and you can see you've got this lovely curve. And you've got this smooth, it says smooth. So click there. It's obviously smooth already. If I click here, it makes it obviously a point, or whatever it's called, corner. Probably a corner it says. Actually, saying that, it's not deciding, it's sharp. I knew it was going to be something. Sharp or corner. Some applications it's corner, sometimes obviously here it's sharp. So you can see that you can get this thing. So anything that's got a curve, and it's a nice curve here, so you've got a lovely curve design. Let's just drag that out. You can see that curvature. Again, that's what it is there. So you can click, and then you can get it. Now, if you go click here, it puts it back. Now, it doesn't put it back to what it was. So if I actually undo, obviously the curve is different. So it doesn't put it back, but it does make it again smooth. But you can go here, and the thing is, it needs to be selected. Click there and makes it sharp. Now, sometimes I think that's the reason why I find it doesn't seem to work, is probably I am not selecting it. I think I am, but you can also, let's just go for it. And I don't know if that's going to be the case. Let's select a lot of them. So if you select, say, all those, some of those look like they're curves or smooth. Let's just go for here, and I'm just going to go for sharp. Yes, they make them all sharp, which is nice, or make them all smooth, or again go back there. So that creates some really quite sharp designs. If you want to create a sharp design, I guess with multiple points, you can select all of them. Let's just select all of them, and then click here, and you can see it becomes a more angular look to your mesh than before. And that's the features. Now, it would be great if there's some more features, presets, etc. But that, fortunately, is not. And you can click apply. And you can see the result there of using, obviously, that sharp effect. It does actually create some quite nice designs, even though that looks slightly curved, to my mind. Well, I hope you found that of interest. Any questions, please put in the comments below. Always great to hear from you. I think I've gone through quite a lot of the points of the mesh warp. I am certain there is still vast numbers of features from the mesh warp you can probably find. I might do a part 2 where I suddenly think, oh, you know what, I forgot this or that. Anyway, please subscribe to the channel. Always adding new tutorials about Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, Photoshop, and many others. I'm also intending to do some live stream. So if you're interested in obviously chatting backwards and forwards on live stream, that would be great as well. Also, a like or dislike for this video. Hopefully you found this of interest. Thank you much. Bye.